Yes.
Isn't it, you're talking about Thompson County?
Who? Yeah, yes.
And how he was like the first person.
Oh, we'll get into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because, like you've said it before, and then you said then I was like, is he like an understood? Okay.
We'll get into it.
So there's a reason you get the word personal, not just because it looks that way.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The looks, I mean,
I just make fun of him because the way he looks.
no, no, I would never make fun of that, somebody for that. That's something. Yeah, well, yeah, that's good. Good acting, huh? Oh, yeah, we will get to him. So with that. So, oh, and then now he's the vice president. He's the vice president. He's kind of is it. So you have this northern patrician lawyer and this southern plantation owner. Very weird combination. So with that, the Adams administration, all we need to know about that is it was kind of a disaster for Adams. Jackson supporters more and more calling themselves the Democracy or the Democrats. From now on, I'm going to call Jackson supporters the Democrats. Even though they really won't take that name until 1829, 1830. But they made sure nothing would pass. He had a tariff bill proposed. He had some internal improvements, a road bill. Nothing got through. Basically, the Adams administration was kind of a disaster. We're not going to talk about that treaty. And so the election of 1828 is very much going to be this rematch. And now more people than ever before are voting. And remember, they're picking the electors. Jackson versus Adams. And very much contrasting characters, different ideas for the country. And you see it, don't you? I mean, look at him. He looks like a sinister salamander, right? Right? Look. Who agrees? You can't not see it. That's Adams. That's Adams. By the way, the vice president for Jackson would be Calhoun. So you have this weird situation where the city vice president will be running as vice president for the opposition party. They're kind of coming back up with new parties again. And so Adams is calling himself a national Democrat, but that's just going to be for one term. Or I'm sorry, national Republican, the old Republican Party. That old Republican Party is dead. It'll be replaced by the Democracy and a new party. So, by Salamander, this is going to be one dirty party. Jackson's harsh discipline, some for shirking their duty, some for murdering Creek Indians after the Battle of Horseshoe Bend. Jackson would have men executed under his command during the War of 1812. And so the Adams campaign would show this as the dirty deeds of Jackson. Here he is, him beating somebody with a hickory switch. Remember Old Hickory? So implying that he is this out of control, maniac, bloodthirsty killer. And then here, the Jackson is, he's man of the people. But they'll knock down the Democracy, and here's Jackson hanging John Quincy Adams. And so this was a nasty campaign. Each of them calling the other somebody who would destroy the Union, destroy the country. Well, the Democrats, Jackson supporters, came up with an idea. Adams tried to pass a tariff. So in 1828, they proposed the tariff of 1828. Democrats, and I'll explain more why later, they didn't want a tariff. But they proposed a massive increase to, on average, double the 25% tariff in 1816. In fact, the tariff on textile was over 60% of this tariff. So a massive tariff, which would dramatically increase prices because it would increase the prices of imported goods. The Democrats didn't want this, but they proposed it in the House to make Adams decide. If Adams votes for it, then they could turn around and say, you voted to increase the prices on cloth by 100%. If Adams goes against it, they can say, you're a hypocrite. You said you wanted a tariff? You're a liar. Just a typical elite who do whatever it takes to get rich. That was the plan. Adams supported it. It passed, and then Jackson's supporters, many of the same ones who proposed the tariff, turned around and said, this is not a normal tariff. This is a tariff of abomination. Like the font. Like the font? You scared? What a scam, huh? The tariff of abominations. It kind of worked. This is something, as more and more people vote, the people who decide elections, I mean, the people who really decide to this day, are low information voters, and they can be fooled by this. Now, when I mean low information, I do not mean they're not intelligent. People are very smart, but they just don't follow it. You know, life is difficult. You have families. They're not paying attention all the time, and then they want to vote, and they're the ones who can be persuaded by stuff like this. More and more to this day. But I repeat, it does not make them dumb, but they're susceptible to dishonest games like Jackson supporters played here. I wish I could say they're not like that today. They're probably more like that today. And so Adams' campaign countered with something evil. And this is something that Jackson has been attacked on his entire life. When he married his wife, Rachel, she was in the process of getting a divorce from a horrifically abusive marriage. And so they attacked Jackson for his wife, Rachel. Now, it was a double attack. She's a divorcee. Even a divorce. This was only used against women, not men. So this is very misogynistic. But it's more than that. When the divorce decree, it was still handwritten, this is a copy of it, it was sent to a judge to finally approve this divorce. And it was really hard, especially for women to get divorces up into the 1970s and 80s. Really hard. But the judge got it. They thought the divorce was signed, so they got married. They didn't realize the judge hadn't signed the divorce decree. So technically she had two husbands. So they dubbed her a convicted adulteress. Because yeah, there were charges brought up and then dismissed. Because they realized it was, so they lied and said that she was convicted of being a bigamist, but actually it was a mistake. But here's the big reason they did it. This is what happens when you let them in government. The poor, the commoners, the average folks. This would be used as a class. We're so much smarter, better, let them do it. And so they're immoral. And this is going to be used to this day. There's a reason why they're poor. It's not because they're in an economic system where they can't find a job or bad luck or things happen. No, there's something wrong with it. And this is going to be a constant refrain. And this is going to hit Jackson so hard. And this is the biggest reason why, remember that duel? That's what Dickinson attacked the front, and that's why he was so inferior. Jackson adored his wife. They had a wonderful relationship. Yeah, I think there's definitely really immoral people everywhere. But this would be used as an argument. Why should we help working people? Because they're so they just waste the money on them. That's what it's argument. Yeah.
This sounds like social Darwinism, but like isn't yet. So it's kind of like the start of it.
That idea's been around for a while, but yeah, you're exactly right. This is like a precursor to social Darwinism. Exactly. And so that gets to the point. Why should commoners ever get anything? They're just immoral. Shouldn't we give our support to the wealthy because they're better? How do we know they're better? They're rich. And that fits in with laissez-faire economics. So this so hurt Rachel, who was ill at the time already. And she had, it just was this constantly attacked because of this. Everybody wanted to attack Jackson, attacked her. And she couldn't take anymore. And literally just after the election, she died. And Jackson blamed those people for her death. And I would say for some legitimate reason. And so with that, when the election came out, I put the two maps up. So first off, Jackson won a big victory. Jackson won big. And you'll notice only up here. But here's the other thing. Look at the vote count. So more people than ever before in 1824 picked electors. Look how many more just 4 years later. More states were allowing more people to feel like they have a voice in government. Yes, I know it's mostly white men, but by 1828, it's white men, but it's more than ever before. It's a big step towards democracy, but still there's many more steps to go. Yeah.
Would the states in the South? Adams,
They figured Jackson was, as they saw him, was more interested in this new economic system of capitalism. Slavery doesn't work though. If I worked at some cotton to them, factory something. So they were always worried that Adams might be one someday down the road in the streets. Spread.
okay.
They didn't think Jackson would, or they didn't think Adams would restrict slavery here. But remember, more and more they're thinking we need slavery. And Adams might be opposed to that. As it turned out, he was. Yeah, I know it's weird to think about this, but the people who are like kind of anti-slavery in the North are more worried about the spread of slavery, not the actual slave states. Which is also kind of sad when you think about it. So with that, that's a ballot. That's a ballot. Who are these people? Who picks the president? They're voting for elector. And so that's your way of saying you're voting for a slate of electors. And I like to sweep the Agian table, which is a Greek reference. Yeah. Oh, no, that's where he's from. These are the towns they're from. These are cities. So it's not, and our butler. And so you literally voted like this. You get a piece of paper. Get a piece of paper, and in front of everybody, you take this and you drop it in a ballot box. Which was either a box or sometimes they'd have a big jar they'd make held in like a box shaped thing. And you drop it in front of everybody. There was no secret ballots. That was seen as democracy. I'm not going to hide who I'm voting for. See what might happen down the road. Are you sure you want to make that vote? We have some friends that want to talk to you. Yes, that would happen. Or, oh, that's a great vote. I guess you need a new job tomorrow. Secret ballots wouldn't come to the end of the century. So with that, thus the beginnings of Jacksonian democracy. And this is one of my favorite pictures of all time. Here's Jackson defending the Capitol. I know there's no rotunda, but the rotunda hasn't been built yet. Remember, the Capitol had been burnt down. They're still rebuilding the Capitol. The Executive Mansion was open, soon to be called the White House. But this is the Capitol. And he's defending the Capitol from all the forces of the elite and the rich who are trying to take advantage of the common man. And he draws them as cur dogs, which are like mongrel dogs, rabid dogs. And so I love that Jackson's standing there as the general. But do you see my favorite point? Oh, they're cowering at him because he won't back down. Huh? Yeah. That's true. He would not be afraid, but do you see it? What's this thing sitting on a dog? What the heck is that? So, greater suffrage. In fact, have you ever heard of the term franchise for the vote? franchise is like you own a little piece of it. And this is what happened. The property requirements begin to go down. Green states had property requirements. Now there's only a few. Now, some still required a tax called a poll tax. But you didn't have to own properties. That greatly expanded suffrage. In 20 years, a lot of those poll taxes would go away. Poll taxes would be used to keep poor people from voting. That's another story for down the road. But more and more people begin to look at this as not this abstract thing, but our government. It's our government. I'm part of this. I have something at stake. And there'd be meetings and town halls. It was actually quite amazing. And voter turnout went up dramatically in this era. Dramatically. That's when people felt they had a stake in the system. This is my government and my vote matters. And they started having mass rallies and mass meetings. And it really meant something. And so look by Civil War, over 80% of eligible voters, the term registered wasn't around yet, for voting. Voted. And you can see it when people begin to lose faith in the government, their voice doesn't matter. That's when things start getting scary. Because if people think their voice doesn't matter, then why participate? Or worse, if my voice doesn't matter, maybe I better find somebody who will represent me, aka a strong man, authoritative governments. Yes. Yeah, on election day. And in the last presidential election, there were 61% of Americans eligible to vote. Is that high or low? That's really, really high for the United States. When I was your age, it was below 50% for presidential election. We'll be lucky to get 40, 45%. A few years, like 2014, I remember there was 30% voting. If people don't vote, you're letting somebody else decide. And it's a little scary if you feel like you don't have a voice. And I'm very worried about that. I think there's a lot of people who do not feel like they have a voice. And so, moving on. Oh, I should add, this terrified some people. We want you yahoos to have a voice. And so with that, what was Jacksonian democracy? Well, Jacksonian democracy is this concept that democracy, it's not a true democracy where you decide on everything. Democracy equals sovereignty. Remember, sovereignty is power. How do you show that? They call it self-determination. We will decide. What does that mean, the vote? Exactly. And the winner is the majority. The Constitution was written quite specifically. This was the goal, to protect the minority. Madison even said it, the elite. And here they're saying, no, we are the majority. This is a big deal. Yes, I know we're only talking about white men here by the end of Johnson's administration. But once you establish that the people are sovereign, then it makes it easier to say, no, when we mean the people, we mean all the people, regardless of race or color of skin or ethnicity or nationality. It's a big, 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 big step. This is our government. When we think about what democracy is, let's say our country's a democracy, it comes out of the Jacksonian era. It's not the Constitution. They weren't thinking that. It's here. And the reforms that would begin to make that in some way would not come till after the Civil War. So this is the beginning of the attitude. This is a big, big deal. And universal white male suffrage became the goal, AKA the common man. And Jackson just assumed the common man, they're smart. I mean, he's with them, the people who solve problems on farms or in factories. They're the real intelligent people. They're not the elite sitting there in their ivory towers. They will always make the right decision. As it turns out, people can be swayed by lots of reasons. But that's what he assumed. And distrust this Eastern elite or this establishment. And that was represented by the first real corporation. Okay, we called it a national bank, but more and more they're calling it the Bank of the United States with a bus. And as he saw, a cabal of elite are using their power to control the financial system, to control the economy, to control the politics for their own personal gain. And there was an element of truth, and I will show you exactly how it turned out to be true. But there's also kind of a conspiratorial thinking here, like a conspiracy theory. And there's a lot of conspiracy theories. Once the Industrial Revolution began, the idea of these vast conspiracies, unknown criminal acts that people saw develop. They didn't really exist in the Industrial Revolution. And now they're just overwhelming. There are certain types of media now that they're spread like wildfire. That's a fun thing we did in special topics. We did conspiracy theories. And so your conspiracy theory was, oh, you did a real conspiracy. So what was that?
Business plan concept.
You had to overthrow FDR and replace him with a fascist government. Could have happened. A little bit of a kind of problem. And what was yours again?
NASA.
Yeah, there's Martians all over.
Yeah.
Living amongst us, right?
Yeah.
Do they fight the reptoids?
I didn't probably believe that
Don't
it's
act
covering
like
up
you
for
Don't act like you don't know.
Yeah. You didn't see my third eyelid flash here, the reptoid. Okay, moving on. Also, he proposed, hey, if we win the government, we should have the government jobs. You ever heard to the victor goes the spoils? The spoil system. Patronage is government jobs in this context. Government jobs, and he said, hey, the federal government jobs, there shouldn't be democratic people there. It should go to the Democrats. That's the will of the people. The people wanted Jackson and his supporters, and so government jobs should go to them. Now, this was at a time where every single government job could be replaced at the whim of the executive branch, just about. This is not like it is today. We'll get to what it is today down the road. And he replaced about a third of them, but he said, I'm going to put supporters in because that's what the people want. There's a logic to this. But now we have a couple people who might be looking at their phone. I don't want to see that again, or I will take a phone. Yes.
So he could only do that for certain things, right? Like he could only do it for Senate. Yeah, look at the Senate.
He couldn't do anything with the legislative or anything, but like every postal job, he could replace that.
Oh, okay,
Or like the customs office where they collect the taxes.
okay.
Or technically, you get rid of all the generals. It's a raw government job. At the whim of the executive branch.
Okay.
So today, the executive branch is like everything from your Social Security office to the Forest Service, to the National Park Service, to the Army. All executive. Now, he only replaced about a third, no different than anyone else, but he's going to be attacked for this. There's a logic to it. But also there can be problems. Oh, almost forgot. Here's Jackson fighting this mini-headed monster. That's the best. There's a lot of pictures like that. Next, party conventions to pick the nominees. Nominees are who the parties pick to run for offices, like the president, Congress, the governor. It used to be done in these little cabals of elite, like members, like all the Republicans in Congress would get together and pick their nominee for president. Or all the Republicans or the Democrats in the state houses would come together. No, what conventions where people from the Democrats or their opponents, the Whigs, would all come together in one spot. Chosen delegates, and then they will choose the person who will run for the Democrats and the person who will run for the Republicans. Or the Whigs, I'm sorry. And this is how candidates would be chosen. Like, for example, the president, they would be chosen this way, and for the Democrats until 1968, for the Republicans until 1972. Now they're chosen by primaries and caucuses. Used to be for state level too. We have a different system now. Now they just have a convention for show. It wasn't the Jacksonian Democrats who had it. There was a party based on a conspiracy at this time. A conspiracy theory that the secretive group called the Masons were actually in a cabal to take over not only the United States, but the world. And the Masons, there's still this conspiracy. People still believe this today, tied to like the Illuminati and the New World Order. And 6 of our first 7 presidents were Masons. And anytime there's a secret society, you're like, oh, what do you hide? And many of them were very wealthy, elite, and so that would be it. And so with that, that's where we get, they would do the first one, but the Democrats would follow. The new political party, they were called the Democracy, which I think is kind of great. But they later on became the Democratic Party, and that is the Democratic Party of today. There's been some hitches in this, up and down, and because it's the common man, it's a much more broad-based party than their opponents. So look at the farmers, Westerns, especially Catholic immigrants, who were left out of that Protestant work ethic. They try to appeal to wage workers and unions, but it was always difficult because of that kind of urban-rural divide. And those who wanted separation of church and state. Jackson was defiantly for the separation of church and state, and was really worried about a religious cabal coming in, seeing that how that Great Awakening was starting. And so, for example, a really controversial issue, which seems weird today, was mail delivery on Sundays. And Jackson said, we are not, our government is secular. The people have freedom of religion, but our government is secular. So there will be mail delivery on Sunday. His opponent said, of course, that he's working for Satan. Which is a fascinating thing. Of all things, mail delivery on Sunday equals Satan. Yes, no, that was a big issue. But it seemed to prove to him he doesn't, or really gave ammunition to those that who could appeal to this new religious way. Well, his opponents were very elite. And this is on a pig, but it's mocking down the road the spoil system. And they hated democracy. This is the number one thing that tied them together. They didn't like average people voting. Even though they couldn't vote for much, just the idea that they thought they had power annoyed them. And so they started calling democracy king numbers, which that is kind of a great name. Think about it, it's more majority rule. Majority rule was the biggest number. And so all Jackson did was just get the numbers of voters, and so he could become the king. And they're nothing but a mob, aka king mob, which should sound like Hamilton. But they should also tell you, by calling individual people nothing more than numbers, their attitude towards regular people. They're just a number. That's all they are, just a number, and not important. But it's a great name to give an idea of what the contempt they had for the common. Yeah.
Did they call?
And it did. Now, let's be clear about it. Jackson has a tendency to be authoritarian, but of course, everybody who's going to be president does. If you're going to be president, you're kind of a different breed. Have you seen people who are presidents? They're all pretty weird. Even the ones that aren't too weird are they're still a little weird. We're not weird in here. Moving on. They call them a dangerous radical, or somebody who plays on people's fears. The great word, a demagogue. Somebody who plays on people's fears. So, person who does that practice is called demagoguery. Like that word? Let's try it again. Let everyone say it, demagoguery. Say it with passion.
Demagoguery.
There we go. Politicians today would never practice demagoguery.
No.
Except all of them. But that's what they claim. He's saying this fear of this urban elite, this cabal of wealthy, which there was an element of truth. Then, of course, he exaggerated. Then, the spoil system, you're going to put a bunch of these ignorant fools running our government. They call it the cult of mediocrity. Does that remind you of something? The cult of what? Yep. So you're worshiping dumb people, implying that he could control them. I'll put my loyalist in there. And yeah, there's an element of that. Then, of course, godless Democrats. But this can appeal to the nativists who are intensely anti-Catholic. So this could divide working people that Jackson tried to appeal to. The nativists who were fearful of their wages going down potentially because of immigrants, at least in the short run, but also these godless Catholics coming in loyal to the Pope. They're not real Americans. These are gonna, now, they have no real thing that ties them together except their hatred of democracy and Andrew Jackson. So they call themselves the opposition party in Britain, the Whigs. And so the main elements are going to be Northern capitalists and bankers, so elites in the North, and Southern plantation owners who hated democracy. They have different economic ideas on a lot of things, but they hate democracy. A lot of Southern plantation owners at first were with Jackson because he's a slave owner. And then they realized, no, Jackson hates us. Jackson hates us. Jackson was a slave owner. He wanted common people, common white men to have slaves. So I will be clear about this. There's a lot of flaws here. Yeah.
Jackson.
Terribly.
So what did it do to him that, like, even?
What he did is he became a lawyer. So he worked very hard on his own. Back then, lawyer. What made you a lawyer back in 1800? I'm a lawyer. But he learned on his own. It was slavery, without a doubt. And this appealed to some of these new churches of the Second Great Awakening. And one thing we should add, we're only a decade away from political buttons. Only a decade away. And I hate Andrew Jackson. Doesn't really fit on the button. They just call themselves the Whigs. They despised Andrew Jackson. So Jackson would talk to people. In fact, there's stories about him taking the carriage in 1829 to Washington, D.C., talking to people along the way. They all came out to see their president. It was a big deal. He's our president. He's one of us. And he was in a lot of ways. He was not an elite in that sense at all. And yes, he had become relatively wealthy, but he still was theirs in a lot of ways, with all the flaws. And so when they had the inauguration, it was crazy. Thousands of people came. This is pre-trained. So they figured out whatever way they could to come to Washington, D.C. and the just finished executive mansion. And people just poured into it. They all came into the living room. It was like, this is our house. And they had tours, and it soon turned into this big party at the White House. And there are barrels and barrels of hard cider, and people started crawling in and out of windows and just having a blast. And of course, you can imagine the elite saying, look what happens when you allow them into our White House, him as president. And in the foyer of the White House, you walk in with this big, well, what food, when you think of food, what is the most democratic food for democracy? Yes. Not yet. Huh? Cheese! He had a massive block of cheese, and they came and they cut out the cheese and ran to the White House with cheese. Yeah, that we should bring that back. Huh?
I said that like 4 times.
Oh, you did? Sorry, Jan, I didn't hear.
No, I just thought it was funny.
Oh God, I didn't hear it. I'm sorry. Well, you can see right there. I really didn't hear it. I'm sorry. So with that, we're going to jump right to this. So his whole goal was to protect the common man in his vision. And the first term, it's kind of hard to see what he was doing. In the second term, he saved the country. But the Constitution was written in such a way to limit the people's power, democracy. And so he said we should not allow that to happen. We should not allow elite to use the Constitution and the fact that only a few people are actually picked by the people to allow them to get rich. And 3 big areas you'll see this. And I got to be clear about it. I'm not presenting this in a positive and negative way, because any removal is going to be one of the greatest stains on American history. But to Jackson's point of view, I'm protecting the common man, white man. nullification, or he'll save the country. And the bank, the bus, 3 areas. And so let's get to those. And by the way, Jackson was this very urbane, polite, loyal man, well-educated, very intelligent. Jackson was impressive in a lot of ways, with a volcanic temper, who occasionally shot people. But land was key. Remember, Jackson was, as he saw, the successor to Jefferson. And there's all this land in the Southwest. What's the Southwest? Mississippi. And there were still, by treaty, 5 powerful tribes. The Creek, that was defeated at Horseshoe Bend. And they were called civilized by the United States because they had towns, some had written languages. So they were civilized to the point of view of Europeans. The Creek, the Chickasaw, the Choctaw, the Seminole, and the Cherokee. The Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Choctaw lived in here. The Cherokee here, there weren't very many Seminole. The Seminole was a tiny new tribe in Florida. And there's this land. And now Jackson is sitting there thinking, okay, if we don't open up this land for the common man, they will become wage slaves to these new factories. And if they become wage slaves, their wages will drop and they will be in permanent poverty. So we got to open this land up. We got to open this land up for small farmers. Jeffersonian idea. Remember, Jefferson's idea was to open this land up and force those tribes to do what? Remember that? That was Jefferson's plan. And so this is going to be, so Jackson, it's not his plan, but he was an ally. He was, okay, yes, this is a good idea from Jackson's point of view. And so this will be called Indian removal. And to many citizens of the United States, they started using this horrific term. What do we do about the Indian problem? Oh, someday they'll assimilate. Assimilate means like join or mesh in to society. But what until then? They're not ready. Yes. And that's actually coming. By the 1890s, they'll literally say, we're going to beat the Indian Army. They would actually say that. That was a common term, which is so horrific, I can't even wrap my mind around it. But by the way, this is a horrific term too. And some of you might know why. Because something's going to happen 100 years later. We'll use the same exact terminology. Does anyone know? Yeah. Twelve years coming, but even 100 years after, not in the United States. Yeah, the Nazi Germany conquered Poland and the western part of the Soviet Union. The vast majority of Jews lived. There are hardly any Jews in Germany, but there are Jews there, and they conquered it, and now they can't force them out. They're at war. They literally called it. Yeah.
On Hitler's ideology, even he writes in on the top, there is one nation in which like ideas of virtue are upheld and it's not are just Germany, it is Hungary.
Yeah, he admired the United States Western policy.
You know that you're not.
Well, it just shows that we have a very complex history, doesn't it? But they called it the Jewish problem. And you're exactly right. Yeah, he very much admired that policy. And also the segregation in the South of Germany. Very much admired. But that's a very pleasant place to stop, isn't it? But we'll finish this tomorrow. Which, by the way, it shows how complex history is. History is really complex, and there's no black and white. There's a lot of gray areas. Oh, I got bad news and good news for you. The test is going to be on Friday. And it's going to be really small. I'm going to review sheets tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm going to go through. Have a review list, maybe. Not in there. Sound good? We have to have a test, though. Who is demanded? You're welcome.
Thank you.
Jazz, I'm so sorry you didn't hear me. Now I feel guilty.
No, I was just thinking about an alley and I just feel like it's cheese. It's cheese. Be loud. I don't know, my first thought was just cheese. I was like, it makes sense. And then I was like, it's probably not cheese, it's probably something like
I'm so good.
with some kind of symbol. But I was so stuck on cheese and then it was right. And it was really funny because I just like threw my hand in the
I
air.
just didn't hear you. Cheese. Yeah, I bet you weren't ready for me to say that. Did we get to the salamander?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Salamander.